All right, so yesterday we went over chapters 8 and 9. Today will be 10 and 11, as I mentioned. And what I'm going to do is, rather than making you key in information, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to send you a copy of the working gym website, and we'll take a look at it after the break. Now, I'm going to, I don't know if this is wrong or not wrong, but all right, so we're on, again, chapter 10, so I'm on page 307, and again, the plan is 10 and 11 today. We'll quickly look at that website after the break, and the rest of the period will be lab. Tomorrow will be lab the entire period, and again, I will not be here Wednesday, or Thursday or Friday, rather. You should be. Mr. Corrigan is just going to walk by, and he's going to count. I have given him a basically let him know who sits where. Or what he might do is just have a piece of paper and have you sign your name to it. I don't know. It does it both ways. So, all right. So chapter 10 is on how to work with forms and data validation. Now, before we go into this, I want to show you a really nice tool that is available to do this that I don't believe they talk about in the chapter. They might, but I don't remember if they do or not. And so what I did was I went out and literally Googled jQuery form validator. All right? And then I went down a little bit and I found this thing that said Jquery Validation plugin, form validation with jQuery. Now, if you do that, it's one of those things where it does a CAPTCHA and it says, you know, pick out all the pictures that are a bus or whatever. So, but the point is, you eventually get to right here. This is it. So I'm just going to put this part of it up there because this is where it is. If you have an interest in looking at it. And if you don't, you don't. It's no problem. But that's it right there. As always, you don't need the HTTPS, but it's just jqueryvalidation.org. Now, if you take the time to go out there and take a look at it, I would strongly suggest that you watch this video, which is about 13 minutes long, 13 and a half, something like that. They go through two examples of how this can be used. The first example is very simple. The second example is more complex. All right, but it's a nice way that you can do validation. I'm just going to leave it right there. So, all right, so jumping back into the book then. So, introductions to forms and controls. Guess what? The first stuff that's in here, you know this stuff. Again, they are putting this in there under the guise that possibly you have not had any experience with forms before. Since we used their HTML book, we had a whole chapter on forms. So that should be a very quick review. How to use jQuery to work with forms, and then there's a validation application. And again, you'll notice, as I mentioned yesterday, it's only like 16 or 17 pages long. This should not take very long to go over. All right. So the example they show, as they mentioned right there, has 3 controls, 2 text boxes, and a button. Now, I'm not going to go back and do this again because we've talked about it before. But they again go over HTTP GET versus HTTP POST. Now, in the class that you take in the 3rd semester, the AWD 1111 class, we have to go in and basically we're doing server-side code. So what we end up doing is we write both GET routes and we write POST routes. And the way to look at the difference between those two is if I want to display a form on the screen, I use a GET. All right? But if I want to take a form that's been filled out on the screen, press the submit button and have something happen, that's a POST. So if you kind of look at it that way, all right, then hopefully it makes a little bit more sense to you. I mean, their explanation in here is just fine. There's nothing wrong with it. I don't disagree with anything that's in here. All right? But the example they give, as you can see, is a very simple example. So when you think about it, realistically, what would you want in here as far as validation? Well, at a minimum, probably for first name, you wouldn't want it to be blank. All right? Now, there's all sorts of different ways that you can test things on there. For instance, you can test for numeric, non-numeric, alphanumeric, etc. And we're going to look at some of that stuff in later chapters. All right? But, when you think about it, and I've said this to you before, when you think of a name like Fjord where they've got like, the two dots over something. How do you account for that in here? You know what I'm saying? And if you're writing a form that you want anybody to be able to write stuff into, I mean, is it impossible that somebody has a number in their name? I don't think it's impossible. I don't think it's very plausible, or it probably happens very often, but it could. So really, the only check that I would put in there for the first name is it blank or not? All right? I mean, other than that, you just have to trust that people are going to do what they're supposed to do. For the email address, again, what you check is, was it formulated as an email address? Now, you may or may not remember, but one of the things that I gave you back a while ago was htmlpattern.com. And there's other sites as well. Oh, holy moly. I'm being asked to do all this stuff. I cleaned out the cache of my system, and I don't know if that's why or not, but I'm not going to take the time to do that. So in here, all we can check is whether the email was formulated correctly. In other words, if I put Jeff in there, it should fail. If I leave it blank, it should fail, etc. All right. This is the kind of thing, again, we've talked a little bit about this before, that if you submit a form, now notice it says it's submitted with the GET method. Yeah, there is a difference between a GET and a POST. Other than what we just mentioned. Typically with a GET, you can submit a form with a GET. And if the information that you submit is not private information, it's totally fine to do that. And then it puts that stuff up in the query string, like you see in the yellow there. But again, if it has passwords, credit card numbers, etc., you want to make sure that you submit it with a POST. All right? And by now, I'm taking for granted that you understand the name property, you understand the action property, and you understand the method property. We've looked at those on more than one occasion. So as they say down near the bottom here, data validation refers to checking the data collected by a form to make sure it's valid. Complete validation is always done on the server. What that means is you should validate your form before you send it to the server. And if you've got something that's mandatory or somebody does something wrong, you should let them know and not send it to the server. So you should have gone through the entire validation schema or scheme, and then you send it over to the server. But on the server, it does the same thing, because the server has no guarantee that what you sent it was valid. All right, so it goes through quite often the same types of checks. All right, so it says to save round trips on the server when the data is valid, some validation is normally done on the client before it's sent to the server. It says, however, this doesn't have to be as thorough as the validation that's done on the server. Yeah. So in other words, where we put in, like I said, all we're checking for first name is it blank or not? On the server side, they may not allow things like special characters, numbers, etc. All right? All right. HTML controls, again, this shouldn't be anything new to you. There shouldn't really be anything that's in there that we haven't talked about directly or whatever, okay? We've also talked about things like autofocus, all right, and placeholder. And all the difference between focus and autofocus is when the form first loads, where do you want it to be? Normally it's on the first form field. Doesn't have to be, but that's kind of tradition, at least, that it's done that way. All right. So you know that there are some built-in features in HTML for data validation, but they're limited. You can put required there, and now that would handle the case of us, for the name, if that's all we wanted was there being something there. But really don't get too enthralled with that. In other words, if you make every field on a form required and you have a lot of them, you could turn the user off. I mean, for example, is it really necessary that you know the user's middle initial or middle name? You know what I'm saying? So just be leery of stuff like that. Now, what we'll look at in a later chapter, where it says there pattern, you can set up patterns. You can do it right in the HTML, but actually it's easier once you get a hold on it to use regular expression handling. Okay? There are some pseudo classes. that you can use for this, and they'll give you some examples. This thing with autocomplete, does everybody know what autocomplete is? You know, you fill out a form, and you know, if I go and go to my name, if I filled it out before, it might say Jeff right there that I can choose, etc. Some people like that, some people dislike that. All right, so you can always turn it off, and that's what they're saying right here. Now here's a pattern, and there's, as you'd probably guess, there's other ways that you can write it. But literally this pattern, a \D like this, all right, says it's got to be numbers. And it has to be 3 numbers. All right, followed by, all right, a hyphen, followed by 3 numbers, followed by a hyphen, followed by 4 numbers. So in other words, you would probably put some kind of a message there, whether it was, you know, in here you might have placeholder text or whatever, where you gave an example. But if you do it like that, then you will not accept the person putting in their area code in parentheses, space, number, dash, number. You either have to write 2 different patterns, or you have to let the person know you've got to enter it like this. All right? As it says, these input controls and attributes for data validation may not be implemented the same way by all browsers, but it's pretty darn close now. Because most of this stuff, you know, HTML5 is now very mature. All right, basically it's been around for a good 15 years. All right. As it says, it's limited in the types of validation it can do. For instance, HTML5 checks whether one field is equal to another, but it can't look up a state code in a table. It can tell you which one you grabbed, etc. All right. But it, as it says, it is limited. So, it says how to use jQuery, and as it says, it provides a lot of different stuff to allow you to work with forms. All right? So let's look at some of these. Now, looking at a lot of them, don't worry about the colon, but look at the name, and a lot of them should make sense. All right? And you can look at those, and basically, they allow you to select those types of controls. So you can grab these types of methods. And we mentioned this yesterday, that rather than value, it's val here. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing doesn't really matter. That's just the way that it is. Notice the jQuery method for trimming an entry. Well, it's the same one you're already using. All right? So you should be able to look at something like this, const age equal parse int. So what is that? That assumes there's probably a text box that you used that's got an ID of age, right? And you're grabbing the value of it. And remember, this $ here, you know, basically says we are using jQuery. All right, here's another example when they're using trim. All right, and again, we've talked about this before. Notice on here, all right, if you look at the second example here, I'm not going to read it, but I've got the mouse right there. That example that's right here, this is an example of a setter. We are setting its value. There's no equal sign there because no one isn't necessary, the way that this is being written. All right? Okay, we got a radio button here. So you can see these. There's a bunch of different things in here that you can use. Now, I will tell you that a lot of people find this really hard to work with, really ugly, etc. That's why I gave you that jQuery validation thing at the beginning. All right, because many people prefer to use that. All right, now I will tell you, the first time you use that, it's kind of a pain. All right, you've got to get used to using it, is what I'm saying. All right, it's not that it's totally intuitive. All right. So the methods for triggering events, again, you should know at least most of these. You know what a focus event is when the cursor goes on a field. When the cursor leaves a field, you know what a blur event is. I've mentioned, for example, with a change event, that's typically any time or any type of field that says input type equals. And anytime you key something into a field like that, you are, for each character that you type in, you are doing a change event. All right? Select, as it says, to trigger the select event. Well, what's that for? Usually for like a drop-down list. All right, the one that you've selected, and submit, as it says, when you've submitted the form. All right? So notice a handler that disables or enables radio buttons when a checkbox is checked or unchecked. All right? So there's enabling, there's disabling. So this is the equivalent of saying disabled equal false and disabled equal true. All right? Why might you want to do that? Well, it could be the case where you don't want to let the user fill out a certain part of a form until they've answered something up above. Or you may even set it up that, for instance, you might have a form that asks 2 or 3 questions, and then based on those answers, either shows an adult form or a kid form, as an example. There's all sorts of different ways that this can be implemented. All right. So as it says, you can use event handlers for those different events to process data as it comes in on the form. All right. You can use an event handler in the submit event to validate the form data before it's sent to the server. If anything is invalid, you can use the prevent default to make sure that indeed it is not submitted to the server. All right, so the chapter ends, and again, like I said, short chapter, with a validation application. So when we look in here, it's a bigger application than the one we saw before. And notice what they've done in here. They've put the errors right here. Usually the most popular way of doing this is to either put them to the right or put all of them up above. All right? And I mean, it wouldn't take much to change that to do something like this. But you should be able to look at this, and ideally at least, it makes some sense to you as far as the errors go. All right? Now, and you'll notice how when they put individual here, the company name got grayed out. All right, they just disabled it. Not a whole lot of new HTML here. Notice the placeholder. And again, if we go in and look at the JavaScript / jQuery, and I've said this to you before, please remember that jQuery is JavaScript. All right? So here's the HTML for the form. I don't think we have to go over any of that, but here's it says the JavaScript in jQuery. Now, when jQuery came out, it was really lauded and applauded as being, you know what, this is such a fantastic product. It's going to cut down the number of lines of code you do. And they literally, the numbers that they gave was that for every 100 lines you're writing, you'll be able to now write it in 10. Sometimes that was true. All right, sometimes it was not. And again, you can see as you look through here, notice email, val trim. You can see that they put in an email pattern in here. This is more often than not the way that it's done. What I'm saying is rather than putting the pattern in the HTML, normally you put the pattern in the code because that's where you're going to be checking for it anyway. But a lot of these are just trimming and grabbing values. All right, so I know that was quick, and the next chapter is not going to take a whole heck of a long time, you know, a lot more. If I can get there, there we go, come on. All right, so chapter 11, how to use jQuery plugins and UI widgets. Now, yesterday I showed you this. I went out to jQuery Ui, jQueryui.com. All right, and I said that's a good starting place, all right, for you to go out there. And UI is user interface, okay? But if I go out and Google and I type in jQuery plugins, one of the first things that's going to come up is there is a jQuery plugin registry. So in other words, these are things that people have submitted. They're free to use, grab, etc. All right? And you can see the different categories that are in there. If you added them up, it's somewhere, I believe, between 2,000 and 3,000 that are in there. And that doesn't mean this is an exhaustive list either. All right? There are people who make a living out of creating plugins and selling them. All right? So there are other free plugin registries other than this one. If I go out here and I type in free jQuery plugin, or just plugins. That should be fine. Again, the first one that's going to come up usually is going to be, well, I thought it would come up right away, is the one I just showed you. But notice, jQuery script, free plugins and tutorials, 50 most useful plugins for front-end development, free jQuery plugins, etc. jQuery plugins free. Not going to keep going. You get the idea. All right. So some are free, some, as you'd probably guess. All right. And what a lot of people do too is they offer a stripped-down version for free to try to get you to try it. And then they go, no, if you'd really like this and you want to be able to do this and this and this, now you got to pay for it. All right. With a lot of these things too, they're really not that expensive. All right. And they literally are forever. It's like I asked this question, I won't ask it now, but I've asked this question before. If you go out, for example, to the Android, to the Google Play Store, and you looked at every single app that was out there, and I asked you the average price of an app. I asked people this before, and there were all sorts of guesses, but the average price is actually 99 cents. Because there are so many free ones out there that when you bring everything else in, plus there are a lot of people who offer a very free version, all right, and then they say, now, if you want to see more, all right, type of thing. All right, so introduction to jQuery plugins, I've kind of been giving you that already. How to use 3 of the most popular plugins. Introduction to the jQuery UI, I already gave you that kind of an intro already. And how to use 5 of the most popular jQuery UI widgets. So let's just jump through this, and then we'll take a break, and then we'll come back and look at some of that code. All right. So it says how to find it. Well, they recommend that you Google jQuery plugins. If you know the name of a plugin, like they're showing here, it's easier to jump right to it like that. All right. And here they give you, I guess I should have went here, but I already gave you the plugin registry. All right. And there are other ones too. One thing that people a lot of times don't realize, notice GitHub. GitHub is not only a repository for your code, there's a boatload of stuff out there. All right, for instance, just so you see this, what we do a lot in the third semester class is we go out to npmjs.com. All right, and this is how we can go and grab packages that are in there. So for instance, if I wanted to grab the Express package that we use in virtually all of our programs, you'll notice that if I grab Express, that it has its own repository, and it has many of these pages will be right on GitHub where the stuff is hosted. All right. Plus on GitHub too, if you're looking on how to do something, sometimes it's a nice place to start. All right. So as it says, plugins are JavaScript applications designed to extend functionality, all right, to make it easier for you to do something. And, it's the old why reinvent the wheel type of an idea. When you are looking at plugins, it's kind of like this. I don't know if we've looked at this before, but, if I go in here, don't worry about what this is. But if I go out here to extensions, okay, and let's just say that I want to grab, I don't know, the first one that's here, Jslint. All right, if I grab that, and typically if I go and grab it and look at it here, notice 150,000, that should say that it's pretty reputable and it works pretty well. I used to go look a lot at these, but there are people who just dislike everything, and there's people who just like everything. It doesn't matter how good or bad it is. It's kind of like if you've ever done that, if you go out to Amazon. I've done that. I used to go out and look at the reviews for a book. Oh, these are pretty good. I get the book, and the book just stinks. All right? And, yeah, they just had a bunch of people who liked it for whatever reason. All right. In general, it says if you can find a plugin for what you're doing, it's better than writing it yourself. I'd agree with that. So how to use the plugin? The thing to realize when you use a plugin is typically what it's going to end up doing. I don't know why this is so slow this morning, but it is. All right. Typically, it's not just the JavaScript file that you end up adding. In fact, quite often there'll be some CSS, and there might even be other stuff that you add. So as it says, yeah, that's a good first step. Study the documentation to make sure it is doing what you want it to do. All right? Second, as it says, if the files are available through a CDN, you don't have to download them. Same kind of thing that we talked about yesterday with jQuery. All right. Number 3, in the head element, code the link elements for any CSS files that are required. Sometimes those also can be done through a CDN. In fact, usually if you can get the plugin through a CDN, you can also get the CSS files through a CDN. Number 4, if the download includes images, an images folder, make sure the folder has the right structural relationship. It's a really easy way to get something not to work. I'm just telling you that right now. All right. Number 5, code the HTML and CSS for the page so it's appropriate for the plugin. And number 6, if necessary, write extra JavaScript and jQuery code. So a lot of times it's just doing this, something like this. All right. And then you bring it in, and then you write some code. Again, part of the aura, so to speak, at least the initial love of jQuery, as I mentioned, is you typically don't write a lot of code. All right? And they're just repeating more of the same right here. So, all right, so they give you some of the more popular plugins. The first one, and you may have seen this before, this is Lightbox, where you might have a series of thumbnails. All right. In fact, I think I've even shown you this. Well, what a cheap plug for himself. So let's see. This I mentioned to you the other day. This is the site that I had created. Hopefully it'll come up. There we go. And if you go over to the photo gallery, I didn't even have to add this. It just came in. But this is equivalent to one of those light boxes. So you click on any one of these, it brings it up. All right. You can even cycle through them this way, or you can close them at any time, that type of an idea. So that's what they're talking about on here. There's the URL for it. They show you what you have to add. All right. And again, as always, notice the order does matter. It doesn't matter, but you can put this before or after your CSS. That doesn't matter. This does. Make sure that if you're using that it goes under the jQuery, and if you have your own JavaScript file, make sure it goes under the Lightbox one. All right, so like I said, the order very much can matter in here. All right. Here's another. This is the BX Slider plugin. These are they're giving you examples of some of the more popular ones. All right. But, again, it's the old joke that, if you tell somebody, hey, you can go and write a bunch of code to do this, or you can go and add this stuff and have it done for you, what are most people going to do? All right. Now it says there's a cycle 2 one here for slideshows. Notice it doesn't require a CSS file or any images. Anytime you create a plugin, the more minimalistic you can make it, the better the chance is that people are going to want to download it. All right. Then they jump into the jQuery UI here on page 338. I've already shown you that page. I've had people in the past who've said, I don't get it. This is just not very big. No, there's about 25 to 30 different categories over here. All right? And as it says, you can you can download all of it, or you can do a custom download where you only grab what you're looking for. Now, what's the difference? Well, if you do the whole thing and you only need 1 or 2 things from it, it's going to take longer to load your file, all right, or your program, the page before it comes up, all right. I would always recommend doing the stable one and not they've got stable and they've got legacy. Typically, legacy. This is if you've got an older version of jQuery. And jQuery really has changed a lot. I didn't go over that chronology yesterday, but it made pretty much a quantum leap when it went from 2 to 3. There were a lot of changes in it. All right. All right, so this is, as it says, the 4 different types of features. We've looked at some of these already. And again, it's a free open source JavaScript library. Okay? It says it can be thought of as the official plugin library for jQuery. I can live with that. How to download it, they go through the steps on here. And notice what you end up getting when you do the whole thing. All right. I'm not going to read this. You can read it yourselves. But as it says here, they give you a custom. It says how to build a custom jQuery library and download the files. All right. And they have another thing here next on how to use any jQuery widget. I've already told you, to me, the easiest way to do it, if you only need one thing. So if I only want this accordion, I've shown this to you already. You just go in there and you go down to the bottom in the middle and it says View Source, and you copy the thing in there. That's it. And then you make changes accordingly. All right? And look, I mean, when you look here, that's all the jQuery that's really in there. There's typically just a few lines. There'll probably be some setup, maybe some sizing, and then you tell it to run whatever it is it's supposed to run. All right, so as it says, in the jQuery, you code a selector, the method to be used, and any options. For a widget that requires images, again, jQuery Ui expects the CSS file and the images folder to be the way they tell you that it's supposed to be set up. All right. So the chapter ends by, as it says, going over 5 of the most popular widgets. There's the accordion one. All right. There's the tabs one. This actually is more important than you probably think it is. All right. One of the things that we're starting to go into next week, you know, we're starting the 10th week now, whether you realize that or not, the 9th week, I should say, of the semester. Yesterday was the 40-day point. We were half done with the semester yesterday. All right? So the reason I'm telling you that is what we're going to be starting to cover next week in the AWD 1111 class, the third semester class, is what are called SPAs, or single-page applications. The idea is it looks very similar to what we're creating right now. All right. In other words, you know, you might have a home page and an about page and a contact page, etc. But technically, it's all one big file, and the system can go from one file to the other. The advantage of doing that is it isn't constantly unloading one file and loading in another one. It's just going to another place in the file, so to speak. So it's faster. The idea behind that, using a product like React, like we're going to use next week, is it makes your application behave more like a desktop or maybe a mobile application than most web applications do. And the tie into this is it's not the same thing, but they're kind of emulating it here with tabs. And the idea is you only have a limited amount of real estate right here. So you can click on any one of these tabs, and what comes up in here, of course, is going to change depending on which one of these you click. But again, notice, there you go. So you set it up here, and there's what you do. That's it. You just tell it to run the method, basically. Button and dialog widgets. All right. This is referred to, if you've never heard the term before, you probably have heard me say it, this is a modal dialog. So it sits out there until you click the X. All right. The date picker, I think we're all familiar with this. So again, if I was creating some kind of an application, let's just say for a medical office, because that's a popular one, or someplace where you're constantly booking appointments, all right, this is one way you could do it. Now, this isn't everything. This is bringing up a date picker. So you're going to be using this in conjunction with either another program or with something that you wrote, because, I mean, let's face it, what you want to do is, okay, so the arrival date is there or whatever, but let's say that it is for an appointment. You want to make sure once they book an appointment, you put it into a database or someplace so that if somebody else comes in, they can't book it at the same time. All right, and that's it. So what I'm going to do right now, literally right now, This is what you call a guy who's too lazy to update his address book, okay? With 5 of you, it's just as fast for me, I think at least, to do it this way. All right. So let me attach that. There it is. It's between 1 and 2 megs, so it's not huge at all. That's done. Send it. Yesterday, you probably don't know this, but the internet went down here probably around 3:30. My class ends at 5 to 4, but they were all doing testing where they needed the internet. So that wasn't a great thing. All right, when I say testing, it wasn't a test. They were testing their programs, but they needed the internet in order to be able, so 3:45, I just said, just leave. You know, and he left. And it looked like that Brock was getting ready to let the other people leave. But it for whatever reason, is very slow this morning. All right, so you should all have it now. Again, it's just a gym website. And I've got a copy of it right here, so I'm going to bring it up. All right. So this is what it looks like. The home page, all it has is, you saw this the other day probably. But you can see that there's an image swap that's in there. Everybody see that? All right, if I go to the second page, if I go to the About, again, same kind of thing. All right, if I go to the FAQ, there's a very simple accordion. You can turn them on, turn them off as desired. There's the BMI, we've already looked at that. And there's the contact form, and you notice the different stuff that's in there. All right, you could make your own determinations. I mean, I know somebody who saw this last year and basically said, you pushed everything over when you put in those error messages. Wouldn't it have been better to put them at the top? That's another thing that could have been done. All right, I just left it the way it was, basically because if we had all these errors and we put them on the top, then it would be very hard to see the entire form on the screen. That's the reason I did it like that. But I want to take a minute or a couple minutes, we'll just do it right now, and go over between now, let's say we'll finish this by 9. All right, so here's the home page. And if I right mouse click, do a view page source, and I go out to, there's my index.js file. Hopefully what you notice is it's brevity. It's really not, there's not a lot in here. All right, so what are we doing? Next slide equals slides, image first child, var next caption. So I didn't even put captions in here. I basically ripped this off from the book. All right. But what are we doing? Well, we're coming in here and we're telling the slides and the captions to fade out. We're also telling it here that if the slide.next length equals 0, in other words, if I've reached the end, we're telling it to wrap back around. Does that make sense? Very similar to what we did when we were working on the Alfano site, and we had the very simple little equivalent of this, I guess you could say. Otherwise, just go to the next one. All right? And it goes and it runs all this, and notice we've got there 5,000. So that what that should mean is when we run this, 1, 1, 2, 3, okay, maybe it's a little faster than that, but you get the idea. So you could change the timing on there, basically. All right? On the About page here, again, this was that before and after stuff. One thing I noticed on here is that I actually gave you the good copy. When I started monkeying with it, and I started playing with the height and stuff on here, because I wanted this to basically look more like that. See what I'm saying? That when I did that, just this one right here, the image that's in here, got smaller, and the text that was in here got smaller. All right, and I didn't really take any time to figure out why that happened, but just did. All right, so if we look in here, whoops, not in there, sorry. And I view the page source, and again, go down, there's swap. And again, that's the whole thing. All right. Now, there's different ways that this could be done, and I know you all know this, but what I have in the actual example here, we go back to here, is both the before and the after picture. This could have been very well set up so that, you know, if you clicked here, it brought up the before. If you clicked here, it brought up the after. You see what I'm saying? But I just went out and grabbed before and after. I just grabbed this stuff from the internet. All right. In fact, I think these were all from Google Images, to be honest with you. Probably find better stuff if I went out to Pexels or Unsplash. And as far as that goes, I think you all know this already, but I've given you Pexels and I've given you Unsplash. There's a lot of other really nice sites out there that give you free, royalty-free images that you can grab. All right? Okay. Next is the BMI one, and again, I know we've looked at this one already. So if I go down to the bottom here, this is a bigger one because there's a lot more stuff. This is very similar, all right, to what I had shown you in class. Now, I don't think there's even an event handler in here per se, all right? So notice here I've got clear.click with functions, etc. This is more the old school way of writing it because it was written a couple years ago, all right? It could easily be written. Notice there's irregular functions. These could have all been replaced with arrow functions without really that much work, all right? And then finally, the last one that's in, I guess I skipped FAQ, so let me go back to that one. But you'll notice again, when I go down to the bottom, there's FAQ.js. Look at this. That's the whole thing. All right? That's, again, why a lot of people get turned on by things like jQuery. They hear less code. Now, there's a big difference in the way management looks at this and the way programmers look at this. Management looks at, oh, less code, I can hire less people. Where programmers typically try at least to look at it, okay, less code, more time for testing. All right, type of an idea. All right, and then finally, the last one that was in here, oops, wrong one. There we go, is the contact, which again is pretty long, but if you look at what's in here, and you go down to contact, you'll notice how long it is. I mean, it's not super long. I don't know how many lines it is, 50, 60 lines. But again, it very much goes the way that in the stuff that I've shown you, except it's been jQuery, for lack of better words. All right, so everything is in the ready function. Like you've seen before, I set up a bunch of consts. All right, I did go back in and change the vars to lets. I believe I changed all of them. But you'll notice in here, so here's basically the equivalent of us doing an event handler, all right, or an event listener, adding an event listener, but it's doing it in jQuery. So what this is doing is it's going through the entire thing here. It's going through every field. And if it finds anything that doesn't meet the right criteria, it goes in and it says, okay, this is valid flag is false, so it won't be allowed to actually try to post. All right? This is, like I said before, that's a better example. That's using actual JavaScript. Now, when you look at that one, it's a little bit different, but if you look here, this says, okay, the caret there means starts with, the dollar sign means ends with, okay? This says 5 digits. I could have also said /D and then put the number 5 in there. You could have done it the same way. That would have been fine. All right? Then this, with the question marks in there, it means that's optional. And as you'd guess, that means if you got a zip code, you can either put in 5 digits or 5 digits, a hyphen, and 4 digits. But that part comes as a group, basically. All right? And you can only have one of those. So it says this is the expression. And then you say here, hey, if it didn't work, So in other words, if it violated those rules, if it wasn't either 5 digits or 5 digits, a hyphen and 4 digits, you're going to set the message to basically invalid zip code format, and you come in here and you set is valid to false. Otherwise, this next thing, that's that asterisk. It sets it equal to nothing. All right? And I think you can figure out the rest. The phone, again, is very similar, etc. So you can take a look through that. And again, the only thing I tell you with this one, and you've already seen stuff like this, is if I come here and I click that, so notice I get everything. As soon as I put in, then there's the autocomplete. As soon as I put in my first name, boom, that goes away. As soon as I put in my last name, that goes away. Address, that goes away. City. Notice with state, I have to choose one. But as soon as I choose one, then that goes away. If I send it back again to, whoops, if I send it back again to here, come on, comes back again. That's exactly what it should be doing. Let's just grab a state here. Well, I'll just grab the right one. So there we go. The zip code again. You know, that's the old joke that you can only help somebody so much. So there's placeholder text in there to try to help the user. But if the user refuses to take advantage of it, you know, and if you come in here and I type in 3, all right, I'm still going to get the error, right? Invalid format. It changed from required to invalid format. But again, 3, 3, 3, 3. Now it's valid. But if I come in here and just put in the hyphen, it's now invalid. All right, and the same kind of thing. With 4, it's valid. If I put in 5, now it's invalid. It's actually performing the way you would want it to perform. All right, and then cell phone, if I come through here and do that, all right, and then notice I preset these. All right, I just grabbed it and put it on the first one. So I'll change it to here, I'll change it to here, and I'll just grab them both. Now everything should be valid. All right, so all tests should pass. So if I click submit, it just says that. Now normally what that would do is that would send it off to a server someplace. All right, and again, that's the kind of stuff that we go into in the 3rd semester class. All right, questions on that? So you've got that if it helps you to take a look at it. And I'm not saying there aren't other ways that could have been written. I'm not even saying there aren't better ways that couldn't have been written. All right, but with a little bit of time I took to try to use that as a demo thing for people. All right, that's basically what it was. All right, so again, the rest of the period today will be lab. Tomorrow's lab, you know about Thursday and Friday. If you get the chance, and I realize, again, everybody's different, but if you do get the chance, then on Monday we're going to go over Chapter 12, how to work with numbers, strings, and dates. Tuesday, we're going to go over Chapter 13, how to work with control structures, exceptions, and regular expressions. My guess is those will both be in the area, in the neighborhood of maybe an hour long each. All right. Then we're going to do Chapter 15. That chapter will take longer because I want to show you the old way that people did things prior to about ES5 and ES6, and then I want to show you the newer way that they've done that. You can probably plan on Thursday and Friday of next week being lab the entire period. Then the following Monday or so, we'll have some kind of a pretest. And then Tuesday or Wednesday, now again, we're talking a couple weeks now, will be your test. Then we've got to go over the rest of the stuff that's in here, which means 14 and 16. All right, and I'm going to take my time on those as well. Now, Mr. Smith, since previously we only went through the first 11 chapters, I'm going to be flying solo here, so I'm going to be creating my own tests for these last 2 tests. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create them and send them off to Mr. Gudmested and find out what he's doing. Now, he might very well right back and go, geez, Jeff, we're on Chapter 3. I said, well, that just means I got a lot more advanced growth than you do. All right. But, I have no idea. I have not talked to him the whole semester. He has meetings with Mr. Corrigan, and Mr. Corrigan's in his office, and they both got the webcams up, So a couple times I've walked in there and he said, "Hi, Jeff." I said, "Hi, Evan." That's been our talk for 8 weeks. But he's a great guy, and if I do have questions, he gets back to me right away as soon as he can. So, all right, so you know what's going on this week, you know what's going on next week. All right, that's it.